So in today's video, guys, I want to talk about romantic projection. Now, it is very seasonal to be talking about love and romance, of course, as it is nearly Valentine's Day. So I thought it would be quite the relevant topic to talk about in relation to psychology, self-improvement, all of this kind of stuff, and psychoanalysis, and how to avoid, fundamentally, that I'm going to be talking about in this video, how to avoid toxic codependent relationships. And we're going to be looking at this most specifically in the idea of romantic projection. So how do we maintain our independence when in a romantic relationship? And why do we fall into codependent relationships? What is going on there? Why does it occur? So to start things off, in Jungian psychology, the dynamic between the idea of the victim complex, or someone with a victim complex, and someone with the savior complex can be understood through the concept of psychological projection and the interplay of archetypes within the psyche of two different individuals. So, two wounded lovers, two people who are insecure in some sort of way, are often going to find themselves unconsciously producing a relationship of codependency, whereby they fall in love with the projection of their own shadow that they project onto someone else, and therefore they identify with it. They don't actually fall in love with the individual for who they are and what they are as their true selves, but they fall in love with a projection that they cast onto the opposite sex of the other individual, in which they are attracted to initially in some sort of sense. Now, one common union we are likely to find that emerges from codependency is that of the victim and the savior complex in a relationship. Very similar to how you have in cognitive theory or cognitive behavioral psychology, the union of the anxious and avoidant attachment when it comes to relationships and connection with people. So this is where the relationship is created and maintained on the basis of the projection of their own unintegrated shadow content. So someone with a savior complex, in a sense, is actively embodying and projecting outwards the shadow or the inversion of their own internal hero archetype, you could say. For this reason, and this is mostly in men when this occurs, towards the attraction of a woman, they believe they have to rescue the damsel in distress. They have to save her in some sort of sense through their own masculinity by rescuing this woman who's embodying the victim complex, who constantly victimizes themselves or something, in some way or another, leading themselves to be attracted towards the person who is embodying the victim complex through projection. So when this kind of projection is occurring for the male, in most typical cases, it is also the same the other way around for women, or for the woman in this instance. The individual who has a victim complex, let's say the woman, will be attracted towards the person, or the man, who they see can rescue them rather than them rescuing themselves. So ultimately, this is all coming from a place of internal lack. People projecting their own unmet needs and onto other people without accountability at all, which leads into the development of a mutually codependent, toxic relationship rather than a healthy, interdependent relationship that has boundaries. So the difference between a healthy and unhealthy relationship is the difference between codependence and interdependence. So you might be thinking as to why and how any of this can occur, or why it occurs. So we could say that the glue that binds this form of relationship, this toxic relationship, you could say, of codependence and enmeshment, emotional enmeshment, and all of these things, is through what we can call projective resonance. This is when two forms of projection basically merge together from two individuals who are seeking external desires that they believe the other individual can fulfill but cannot find fulfillment from oneself. Basically saying that projective resonance is when two forms of projection come together and rub off on each other and create a union of kind of unhealthy, insecure attachment, whereby they are using each other to fulfill what they need to kind of discover and figure out for themselves, but instead they're using this other individual to fulfill that need that they need to go and find for themselves. You know, if someone's got a savior complex, they are looking for some sort of individual who needs to be saved instead of them saving themselves. Or if they're someone who has a victim complex, they're looking for someone to save them rather than them save themselves in whatever situation they are in. And this is totally dependent on like their childhood, how they grew up, and all of this type of stuff, as to depict which one they're going to be more like in this kind of category of attachments and projections and all of this kind of stuff. Therefore, the personal insecurities that feel relinquished, that are non-existent anymore, which maintains the relationship, which could be, you know, ultimately fear of rejection, need for validation, desire for recognition, avoidance of conflict, all masquerade as the binding glue for the true love they have fallen for, basically, which ultimately feeds the fantasy that they are both in. That is ultimately what is happening there. It isn't that they are actually in love, but that they are instead using each other to try and heal their own personal insecurities, which they both lack accountability for. And this is all around the idea of integration. And even if you go into Jungian psychology, you have the idea of projecting the anima and projecting the animus, the feminine, and projecting the masculine, instead of us accepting those other ways of being within ourselves so that we can be extremely independent and go towards that individuation path where we are not being codependent with people and relying on other people to such an extent where it even destroys our own identity and well-being. So that kind of gives you an understanding to some degree of basically codependent relationships, toxic relationships, how they can emerge. And, you know, as I was saying, something very similar to this is if you look into attachment styles, it's very similar to this idea of maybe like a victim complex or a savior complex. Different attachment styles also attract different kinds of individuals, and therefore if you're of a certain attachment type that is of an insecure attachment type, you need to basically look into that for yourself. Try and understand why that attachment type is developed within you so that you can develop a secure attachment type, so that you can bring in boundaries and maintain boundaries within relationships, and so that people are not overstepping certain things within that relationship that you're in. So fundamentally, that is the best way to look at it, how to avoid toxic relationships, is to understand that there's in the realms of love, in the realms of lust, there is a lot of projection, and you need to be aware of projection. You need to be aware of fantasy making, how we develop fantasy or imaginative fantasy of love and lust and all this type of stuff in relation to certain other people that isn't actually real or manifested as true. So it's very important to be aware of this kind of dynamic that's occurring within our own minds so that we don't fall into these traps, or that we don't fall into love. You don't want to fall into love. You want to be in love, because to be in love is to be present. And that is way more satisfactory and healthy than to fall into love like you've fallen into a big black hole that is an abyss that you can't get yourself out of in the same shape that you were before as an individual. So with that said, guys, if you are interested in any kind of coaching in relation to procrastination, individuation, self-improvement, any of those types of things, and if you feel like you resonate with this video in any kind of sense, if you're someone who's struggling with bad habits, if you're someone struggling with low self-esteem, intrusive thoughts, book in a free one-on-one call with me and we can go over the usual gist of things and to see if one-on-one coaching would work for you with the style that I use and with the methods that I use to approach people with. And of course, do download the free individuation course down below. Subscribe to the newsletter if you're interested in reading and being notified of daily and weekly newsletters that I put out on different articles about different things within psychology. Make sure to sign up to that as well. And with that said, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video.